Hello everyone and welcome to my channel, Coding with Zach. Now we've covered how to instantiate variables and a list. I believe that's almost everything we need to get started with making a rock, paper, scissors game. So I'm going to come over here to the left hand side, right click on the folder, create new file, and then I'll do rps.py. And then from here we will start writing out the information we need. So for the rock paper scissors game, we will need a list that has rock paper and scissors in it. This is because we'll have to access this information to know if we're winning or losing. And then we'll also need a random number generator for the computer to be able to access the rock paper scissors portion of this. So we'll import random, save it, and then we will say computer number is equal to random dot rand int 0, 2. Now we haven't talked about this, but this is a class, the import random, and it's a class, same thing as a hello world.py or rps.py. Same way that is a class, random is a class. So if we go over here and go to Google and type in Python 3 random number, and then go to the random number and the Python documentation, we'll go through this, and this is all the functions that are available in the random class. So I went through this and looked and decided that I needed to use random int, and that is what we're using. So random int, a function like random int right here is a function. It can be used to do operations on numbers, strings, lists, anything you want. And in this case, we're passing it in two numbers. The first number is to say where the number list will start at, and then the second number is to state where it stops at. So this should give us a random integer from 0 to 2. And to check that, we can print computer number, and we'll save this. We'll go back to the command prompt and we'll type in Python rps.py and 2. I'm going to press up and mash enter again, 0, press up 1, and then just continue on just to make sure that we're getting what we want. So yes, we're getting 0, 1, and 2. We will be covering functions later on in another video. We'll get in depth in how to use functions, and it'll make more sense then. But for now, just know that a function is inside a class that can be used to do a bunch of different operations on different types of variables and data. Now, continuing on to make this program for rock, paper, scissors, we have the random number generator, and this comes in useful to access the list. So right here, we'll open bracket, close bracket with list 1 in the front, and this is just saying list 1 access rock, paper, scissors depending on what the computer number is generated. So if we save this, we should now start seeing, instead of 0, 1, 2, we will see if the number is 0, a rock will be output. If it's a 1, paper, 2, scissors. So we'll come back, we will type in Python rps.py, press enter, and in this case it was a 1 and paper was printed out. And to prove that this was the number is matching what we're accessing in the list, I'll come back to the code, type in print, and we'll print out the computer number. Number right there. So computer number should get set to random integer at this position, so we should be able to access it without it changing between these two. So I'm going to go back after I saved it, type in python rps.py, press enter. 1 paper, 2 scissors, 1 paper, 0 rock. Okay, so you're seeing here, if it's a 1, paper is outputted in from the list, 2 scissors, and 0 rock. And that's what we are expecting, so that's good. And hopefully you can understand that this portion right here is actually the portion that is setting this variable to a random integer between 0 and 2. And then what we're simply doing here is just calling the variable that was instantiated right here. We're just calling this computer number variable, and we're using that same variable number to access this list. Now we can start doing some interesting things since we have a way to access the list. So the next thing we'll be doing is getting user input to also access the list. So we'll say user input equal to input and we'll see how this works. And right here it stops 5. Okay, so that is working. We will now print out the user input once we receive it, and we're going to concatenate this so we can visually see this is user input, just to make it easier to look for us. I'm going to save it, go back to the command prompt, press up, enter, 1 paper, 5, and then user, right there where I've typed 5, it just grabbed that user input and spit it back out to us. I'm going to press up, do the same thing, but I'm going to press 1. Okay, so there you go, user input is 1. Now we're going to do the same thing here with list 1 as we did with computer number. Now if we save that, go back, press up, press enter, and if I type in 1, we should get paper, and we get an error. So right here, type error, list indices must be integers or slices, not string. So I believe the user input is trying to access the list with a string value of 1 and not an integer value. So this is where understanding what the variables are comes in handy, but since this right here is a string variable user input, we need to cast it to a integer variable. Now with Java, we explicitly would state what the variable is when we instantiate it, but in Python it just goes off the input. So it just goes off what the information is being used in the variable. So with user input, it is automatically set to a string. So let's see, let's go back to the command prompt and then python rps.py, press enter, and then pass in a 1, and there you go, paper is output. So hopefully you can see that without casting this to an integer, this user input is a string, and you can only access a list with integer values. That's why we got that error, and that's casting this to an int as how we got around it. Now we're going to go back and look at the program when we put a value that's not 0, 1, or 2. We should expect an error because we only have a list of range 3 with 0 being rock, 1 being paper, and 2 scissors. So if we put 3, we get a index error, list index out of range, which just means we don't have an index of 3. We have an index of 0, 1, or 2 because the length is 3. Now that we found a problem with the user input, we will have to limit it so that the user cannot crash our program. And that's a common issue with user input. You have to figure out ways to limit it so that they can't go into your program and do weird stuff. So to handle this, we will use an if-else statement, and we haven't covered it yet, but a if-else statement is just a true and false expression. So it uses things like, if 1 is equal to 1, do this. If number 1 is greater than or equal to 0, do this. If string 1 equals string 2, do this. So to start this off, we will say if int user input, because we got to cast this to an int, is equal to 0, we want to print the user input. And if it's not, we're going to print user input is not in an acceptable range. So if you can see, if the user input is equal to 0, print this. If it's not, print this. So in the logical expressions, we have to use a double equal sign to make this a logical operator. If you only used one equal sign, that would be like trying to set a variable, and it doesn't work in an if-else statement. So you have to use 2 equal signs. Another thing to mention with the if-else statement is that at the end of the if statement there is a colon, the same thing as the end of the else statement, there's a colon. And then right underneath the if statement, the print is tabbed over because whitespace matters in Python. Usually with other programs, whitespace doesn't matter because you use semicolons to mark the end of a statement. But in Python, it matters, the whitespace matters. So let's go back to the command prompt. We will type in Python rps.py, and we will use 0. And this is user input equals rock. Now let's try 1. User input is not an acceptable range because I've explicitly said this is only true if user input is equal to 0. Now let's go back to our program. Now to start out off an if statement, you start with if, but you can add more if statements to make this more robust. So to add if statements, we'll say elif int user input is equal to 1. Print, I'm going back up here to this if statement. I'm going to copy it and then just paste this down here. And I'm going to copy this else if, and I'm going to make another else if. And we're going to say if this one's equal to 2. So if you can read this, it is saying if user input is equal to 0, do this. Else if input's equal to 1, do this. Else if user input's equal to 2, do this. And then if none of these are true, print this. So to test this, we're going to save it, go back to the command prompt, rps.py, user input is paper, it's working there. User input is scissors, it's working there. 3, user input is not an acceptable range. Now let's try -1. User input is not an acceptable range. So let's try 0 one more time. Everything is working as expected. And we can come back to the program, and since we've limited down the user input, we can start to add in some logic to see if the computer beats us with our input. So the next step is to check the user input against the computer input. Now we have input coming from the user and we have input being generated by the computer. So we can make a win-lose condition with these if-else statements. So if user input is equal to 0, we're going to come down in here, and this is called a nested if-else statement. We're going to say if computer number is equal to 0, print the game was a tie. Elif computer number is equal to 1, print the computer won. Else print the user won. And we're going to copy this if-else statement and we're going to paste it into each one of these, and we have to change them to be correct. So here we're going to say that's true, 1 is equal to 1, it's a tie, and then the computer won and the user won. So if user input is equal to 1, that's a rock. And if user input is equal to 1, it's a paper. And if the computer uses 0, the user won. And if the computer uses a 1, they're both paper. The game was a tie. Else the computer won because it had scissors and you had paper. So now we just have to come back down to this last part and change this around. And the game was a tie if the else statement, because they're both 2. And then the user won if the user inputs 2 and the computer does a 1. So user input, we're going to print out user input, and I also want to print out the computer input. This way we can see what was what and make sure our logic is correct. And let's go back to the command prompt, press up, and here I'm going to press 1, the user won. The input, I spelled that wrong and I didn't put a space. As you can see, it's the rock is concatenated together with the misspelled input, and it makes it look ugly. We'll go back and fix that. But user input was paper, computer was rock, the user won. That's true. I'm going to come back here, fix that. And clean this up some. Okay, what do we want? 2, we want scissors. The game was a tie. We use scissors again. The computer input was paper. user 1, and user 1, trying to make it where the computer 1. Scissors, computer input was rock, the computer 1. So that's working like we wanted it. User input paper, computer input scissors, computer 1. Paper and paper was a tie. And then scissors, trying to get it where we win. The user 1. User input's paper, computer input was rock, the user 1. So it looks like everything's working the way we want it. And that's all there is to it to make a rock, paper, scissors game in Python. Next video we'll be covering a while loop. That way we can play this game until we get tired of it, and we'll also be adding a counter so we can keep score. Like, comment, subscribe if you found this useful. Thank you for watching.